The dogs stationed at English castle gates in 1066 had no name in any record. Not because they were forgotten, but because they were never meant to be remembered. Not because they were unimportant, because they were considered too essential to need one. They guarded the outer walls. They detected intruders in the dark. They died doing it. And what they endured was worse than most soldiers. No chronicle ever bothered to write it down. We're going to reconstruct what happened to them anyway. From the bones, from the silence, from the logic of a system that treated living things as instruments. This is the story of the dogs England threw away. These dogs were not companions. That matters. Because the moment you understand what they actually were, tools, calibrated and expendable, the entire feudal world snaps into focus around them. The same lord who selected a dog for its aggression selected a peasant for his labor. The same logic that determined how much a dog was fed determined how much a soldier was paid. Enough to function, never enough to matter. To study these animals is to study the architecture of a system that ran on controlled suffering. And the question that follows is uncomfortable. If no chronicle recorded what happened to the dogs, what else did that silence swallow whole? Here is the structure. It will follow one of those dogs across the full span of its working life, from the moment it was chosen to the moment it was not needed anymore. From the kennel to the gate to the grave, or whatever passed for one. The reconstruction draws on what survives: bone records, castle provisioning accounts, and training manuals written for falconers and huntsmen. Sensory detail will carry the argument. What it smelled, what it ate, what it learned to fear. The question underneath all of it is simple. What did a single day actually look like? The choosing happened before the dog understood anything. A kennel master would arrive at a peasant holding, not invited, not announced formally, and move through a litter the way a miller moves through grain. Hands on flanks, thumbs pressed behind the skull, eyes watching which pup held still and which one bit. Size mattered, but not the way you might expect. Too large and the animal ate too much, slowed on wet ground, wore out before its usefulness peaked. Too small, and it couldn't hold a man at a gate. What they wanted was a particular middle, dense through the chest, low through the shoulder, quick to snarl when cornered. The aggression test was simple. They would crowd the pup, block its retreat, and watch what it chose to do with that pressure. The ones that folded, he left. The ones that redirected outward, he took. Lineage factored in only when it was known, which was rarely. Most peasant dogs had no recorded line. The kennel master carried that knowledge in his hands, not on paper. The mother's temperament was assessed in the moment.
He's strong,
the father's,
like his father there.
If traceable,
Good
was
hunter.
a bonus.
Aye, this...
What no chronicle records, and this is the part that pulls, is how many pups were culled on the spot, and by what method. The silence around that detail is its own kind of answer. How do you train a dog to attack on command but never bite the hand that feeds it? The answer is hunger. Not metaphorical hunger, literal, managed, deliberate starvation. The kennel master controlled the food. That was the first and most fundamental tool. A dog that depends on you for survival does not bite you. It redirects everything else outward. Training began with staged intrusions. A servant, padded with leather wrapping around both arms, would enter the yard at night. The dog was not corralled, it was released. If it hesitated, the rod came down, not to wound, but to mark the hesitation. The next night, the same servant returned. By the third or fourth repetition, the dog stopped hesitating. Night work was everything. Castle vulnerability peaked after dark, so training happened after dark. The dog learned to read silence as threat. A footstep in gravel at the third hour meant something different than the same footstep at midday. This was not instinct. This was conditioning layered over weeks in darkness until the dog's nervous system mapped threat onto night itself. Obedience to a specific handler was enforced through exclusivity. Only one person fed the dog. Only one person released it. Only one person called it back. Other handlers could not replicate the recall, which made the bond operationally precise, but also created a vulnerability no one thought to name until a handler died and left a trained weapon with no one it trusted. Before the sun cleared the eastern palisade, the dogs were already awake. Not because anyone came for them, but because hunger had its own clock, and their bodies had been calibrated to it. The morning feed arrived at first light. A gray mash of barley grain and boiled bone, sometimes thickened with fat, skimmed from the garrison's own cookpot. It was not generous. The portions were measured not by care, but by calculation. Enough to sustain muscle, not enough to dull urgency. A dog that ate well became a dog that waited. And waiting dogs were not useful dogs. After feeding came confinement. Through the long middle hours, the pack stayed kenneled. The enclosures were low, dark, and built close to the outer wall. Not for comfort, but for acoustics. The stone wall amplified movement on its other side. The dogs learned to read vibration before sound, sound before sight. Then came dusk, and the rotation began. Each patrol route followed the same perimeter arc. Each dog assigned to a zone it had walked so many times that deviation registered as wrongness. They did not overlap. The spacing was deliberate, coverage without redundancy. But the real hierarchy only revealed itself after the patrol ended, when the animals returned to the kennel and the darkness closed back in. Rank was not assigned. It was contested nightly in low growls and slow posturing, until the pack settled into an order that would hold. Until morning broke it again. What no one recorded was what happened when that order collapsed. What does a war dog's body look like after 2 years of service? The answer comes not from chronicles, but from bones.
We found several partial dog skeletons here,
have
roughly
surrendered
22.
the remains. And what they show is a body shaped entirely by scarcity and use. These animals ate what the kitchen discarded. Offal, bone splinters cracked open for marrow. Stale bread gone hard as stone. Household rolls from Norman Estate's record grain allocations for the kennel. But the quantities are thin, enough to maintain function, not enough for anything more. The dogs were fed the way tools are maintained. Minimum input, expected output. And the bones carry that history. Skeletal analysis of remains from this period shows enamel fractures consistent with chewing through dense bone under pressure. Joint surfaces in the shoulder and hip reveal degeneration that would have set in early, before age 5 in many cases. Some specimens show healed rib fractures. Others show wounds that never healed cleanly at all. Malnutrition did not announce itself. It accumulated in shortened limbs, in teeth that wore unevenly, in spines that curved under repeated strain. The body of a working war dog was not the body of a companion
Each bone fragment
animal.
is evidence of function
It was a
demanded
record of what
and
had been asked of
extracted.
it, written in calcium and cartilage. And what had been asked of it was considerable, which raises the question of what happened when the body could no longer answer, and where the system placed that body to begin with. The dog occupied a precise position in the medieval order of things. Not arbitrary, not sentimental, precise. Below the horse, which carried knights and commanded fodder allocations written into law. Above the pig, which was meat waiting to be named. The dog sat between utility and expendability. Closer to the pig than anyone who owned one would have admitted. This placement had consequences.
He
And
nearly
they
lost
ran
his
in
hand
one
to that
direction.
boar. Hey,
A
and the
horse
beast
could be
nearly
given
took
a
his
name
dignity
in the
too.
charter. A hunting
Another
hound
round
could
for
appear
the...
in a lord's will, bequeathed like silver plate. These animals had standing, however narrow, because their function attached to aristocratic identity. The destrier reflected the knight. The greyhound reflected the hunter. The castle guard dog reflected nothing. It was not a mirror. It was a mechanism. Affection toward it carried a kind of social stain. The chronicles do not say this directly. They rarely say anything about these animals at all. But the distinction enforced itself through
We must secure the
silence.
northern marches. Unlike
Hunting
the others, he
hounds
understands
were named.
loyalty.
Guard dogs in the
Ensure the
surviving
patrols
records
are doubled this
almost
week.
never are. A name is the beginning of personhood. Its absence is a deliberate erasure.
Look at the
And yet the
trauma on the
bones suggest
zygomatic
these
arch.
animals lived in close
see it.
proximity to the people who
Document
used them. Close enough to matter. Close enough perhaps to trouble the boundary that the feudal order had drawn. Which is where the record goes quiet, like avoidance. What happened when a castle dog actually encountered
What
an intruder
happens
in
when
the dark?
training?
We have one answer. Not from a chronicle. From a coroner's inquest recorded in Sussex, dated November 1066. 3 weeks after Hastings, the country still burning. A Motte and Bailey near the coast. Saxon built, Norman occupied. 3 dogs on the palisade at night. No names in the record, just tres cans de custodia. 3 guard dogs. Someone tried to scale the timber wall. The dogs responded. By morning, one man was dead from blood loss and tissue damage to the throat and left arm. One dog had been stabbed through the chest and died on the walkway. The other 2 were chained by dawn and given no medical care. The inquest does not say whether the intruder was a rebel, a deserter, or someone trying to retrieve stored grain. It does not name the dogs. It does not explain why they were chained afterward. It simply notes, the dogs performed their function. This is not a story about loyalty. It is a record of deployment. The dogs were released, they engaged. One was killed in the process. The survivor was restrained because the dog's utility had peaked and its volatility now exceeded its value. By the logic of 1066, this was not cruelty. It was protocol. The silence around what happened to those 2 dogs after the morning of the inquest is the same silence that surrounds the entire category. They disappear from the record the moment they stop being useful. The dogs that survived deployment rarely survived long. Skeletal remains from 11th century sites show patterns of trauma that speak to what was not written down. Ribs that healed crooked. Abscesses that ate through jawbone. Vertebrae fused by untreated infection. Mange so severe it left scoring on the bone where the animal clawed itself raw. There was no veterinary medicine in 1066. There was triage. If a dog could still bark, it stayed on the chain. If it could still bite, it stayed in rotation. If a wound festered but the animal remained mobile, the wound was left alone. Functionality was the only metric. Pain was not measured because pain was not relevant. Parasitic worms were universal. Fleas, lice, ticks, endemic. These were not treated. They were tolerated. A dog infested with worms could still guard a gate. A dog covered in sores could still chase an intruder. The threshold for intervention was not suffering. It was operational failure. When a dog stopped eating, stopped moving, or became too aggressive to handle safely, it was replaced. Not rehabilitated, not retired. Replaced. Whether these animals were valued misses the point. The question is what value meant. There was no retirement. A guard dog that could no longer run was not given rest. It was reassigned. Lighter work at first, circling a storage yard, sleeping near a grain store. Still useful, still consuming. But the feudal economy was precise about cost. A dog that ate without producing was a liability, and liabilities were removed. Some aged into the wastework rotation, set to patrol the outer ditches, the refuse pits, the killing grounds after slaughter. The margins, places where the smell of death already lived and no one wanted to stand. The dog worked those edges until it couldn't. Others didn't age out at all. Raids came fast. Fires spread through kennels. A dog injured in the chaos, bleeding through the night, received no surgeon and no mercy. Just the practical calculation of whether it would recover before it needed to function again. Most didn't. Here is the detail that confirms it. There are no dog burials attached to castle perimeters from this period. No marked graves, no votive deposits, no ritual treatment of remains. The bones appear in midden heaps, alongside broken pottery, discarded tools, spoiled grain. Discarded tools, spoiled grain. They were not mourned because mourning implies a relationship the record refuses to name. The absence of burial is not absence of feeling. It is the shape of a system that never allowed feeling to matter. The dog disappears into the refuse. The gates still needed guarding the next morning. They were never named because naming creates accountability. A name implies a history. It implies maturation, decline, replacement. It requires someone to notice when the dog grows old, when it fails, when it must be replaced. A name is a thread of continuity, and continuity reveals the pattern. The pattern reveals the logic. And the logic is this: everything in the castle, human or animal, exists to be consumed.
Get back to your
The
post.
guard dog's life
Move
cycle
along
is
now.
a miniature of the entire feudal apparatus. Selected for utility. Trained without excess. Fed at the threshold of function. Worked until failure. Discarded without ceremony. The mason who cut stone until his hands bent. The archer whose shoulder tore from the draw. The woman who bore children until her body gave out. They were not named in the administrative record either. The dog's anonymity is not neglect. It is honesty. It is the feudal order admitting what it cannot say aloud. That even those who serve it faithfully will be ground down by the very function they perform. The dog at the gate is the system holding up a mirror, and the mirror reflects everyone. That is why the silence is so loud. Not because the dogs were forgotten, but because they were understood. The project
This
of reconstructing the dog's
Reconstruction-
life
This looks like
is
late
also the
14th
project
century
of
wear.
reconstructing every
And
other
definitely
life the
pig long
archive
bone
refused to
underneath it.
dignify with a name. The servant who carried water. The child who died before baptism. The laborer whose back broke lifting stone that still stands. Their erasure was not an accident of time. It was policy. The archive recorded what mattered to power, and power did not care about the body that performed the work, only that the work was performed. So, when we piece together the dog's existence from tax rolls and trench fill and zoo archaeological animal bone fragments, we are not doing whimsical history. We are doing the only history that refuses to take silence as an answer. The dog's life matters because it teaches us how to read against the grain of every document that was never written. How to see the unpainted hand, how to hear the unrecorded voice. That is the stakes. Not the dog, the method, not what was lost, but how we learn to find it anyway. If that method matters to you, if you believe the unrecorded life deserves the same rigor as the crowned one, then stay. The next episode goes further down, below the Great Hall, below the chapel, to the latrine shafts of 1066, where what people ate, what sickened them, and how close death lived to ordinary mourning are all preserved in the one place no lord thought to sanitize for posterity. Subscribe. Next episode, we read the castle from the bottom up.